Hey, welcome everybody. It's been a while since we've done one of these sessions, but if you happen to follow us on YouTube, just on, I guess it was last Friday, we did a special edition of the weekly podcast where we had some folks from AWS join us and we talked about Gen AI on AWS and we looked at various AWS services and how to get started. So based on that, I thought, hey, that would be a great time to restart our build on series here, let's build series, and gonna start with Bedrock because we spent a fair amount of time talking about Bedrock. So I've got the Bedrock documentation up here, and I also created a little cheat sheet. I'm hoping all the technology works. There we go. And what I've got here are sort of the to-dos and what I thought we could start working on. I don't know how much we'll get done. I've got about an hour today to work on this, but what I'd like to do is set up a knowledge base that we could load some of our own custom source data into. I think to start, we're going to use blog posts. I've got a series of blog posts I'm going to dump in there and test everything out. So you can see kind of based off the reading I've done in the documentation, what we need to do. And I've created our sort of starter project that we've normally done in the past. So we need a role. We're going to need an S3 bucket for our source documents. If you create, I did a walkthrough of this using the management console, and it's actually quite easy in the management console to do, but great way to test through the management console, but being able to do things programmatically is always better in a sort of a non-sandbox environment. So if you go through the management console, you can kind of click, next, finish, and it builds everything out for you, including the vector store. So we're going to use for this, we're going to use OpenSearch Serverless to do this piece. We'll create our knowledge base. We'll upload some data. The one thing that I couldn't figure out when I walked through this, just to make sure I was a little familiar with what I was getting myself into, is there's a sync process that needs to be set up. And I probably just overlooked it in the console during the setup. But once we've got our source data into our S3 bucket, we'll run a sync. And then from there, we'll be able to run our queries against an LLM. We're going to use Claude to do this, and it'll be basically pulling information out of our knowledge base to help fulfill those queries. Like I said, I've only got about an hour today to get this restarted, so I'm not quite sure how far we'll make it, but these are our sort of project goals. Take us a couple sessions. So if I flip back over to Firefox, I've got the setup or the documentation page for setting up knowledge bases for Bedrock, and it's relatively painless. Okay, you can kind of see the general steps here. Gather our source documents to add to our knowledge base. As I mentioned already, we're going to use blog posts for that. The other nice thing I lucked out on it, and I'll see if I can find it in here. There's a part of this documentation or a section of the documentation that discusses the requirements, right? So it doesn't support any type of format, file format, but lucky for us, we use markdown files for all of our web content, the blog posts, and that is a supported information source or a supported document type. So I've got all those ready to go. We aren't going to do step 2. So you can create a metadata file for every one of those documents that you provide in your S3 bucket that the knowledge base will use. And this just provides us with a way to kind of provide additional information to Bedrock, to the knowledge base, to kind of give it some more context. We won't do that today. At that point, we can upload our data, and then we're going to need our vector index. So the vector index is within our vector store. And as I mentioned already, we're going to use OpenSearch Serverless to do that. Okay. There's a couple of other options that you have available. We're going to go down the path. We'll set up our knowledge base, and then we'll ingest the data. Now, one thing that I did or that I ran into when I was doing this walkthrough is you need to have access to the models prior to actually doing this. And, I probably should have done a little more RTFM before I started. And I was getting an error that I couldn't quite figure out. And with a little bit of digging around, what I realized is there's really 2 models that are going to be used here in our knowledge base. There's what's called an embedding model. And that's what is in sort of step 6 here. where we're going to basically ingest our data, our blog posts, into our knowledge base using what's called an embedding model. And in my case, I have access to a bunch of the models in my demo account, but I'll show you this in the documentation as we go through. There are a limited number of models that are supported with the knowledge base feature right now, both for querying and embedding. So I had I had access to the correct models for running a query, but I hadn't given myself access to a model for embedding. So be careful with that. That got me. And then once that's done, once your first sync runs, then you can simply, for me, I just did the testing right in the management console. I can open up the knowledge base or open up a chat window, say, use this knowledge base with this model, and we can run some queries. Now, here is what I was mentioning. Knowledge bases are currently only supported in Northern Virginia and Oregon. We're going to use Northern Virginia for this today. Here are the models that are supported for embedding your data into your vector store. I'm going to use Cohere Embed. This is the one that I accessed the other day or had to add to our account. And then you can see there's a number of models that are supported for querying and generating responses. Today, we're going to use Sonnet. Again, if you've ever listened to the podcasts on Friday, Travers and I talking about AWS News and Gen AI updates or interesting Gen AI articles that we run into, you'll hear me talk about how much I enjoy working with the various implementations of Claude. It's fast. It's quite good, I find. So we'll use Sonnet to do that once we get to that part. So that's our first little bit. There are some prerequisites for this. You obviously need your files. So I've sort of done that already. We've got them in Markdown. As I mentioned, we're not going to worry about adding those metadata files to anything. We need a vector store. If you do this through the management console, that's done automatically for you when you're creating your knowledge base. You make a couple choices on the console and you're ready to go. And we do need a service role. Again, if you're doing this through the management console, you don't have to worry about that. It's done for you. We're going to do that programmatically today. And then finally, there are a bunch of security considerations to take into account, as is the case with everything we do in AWS, particularly around encryption. I think for the first, there's actually two things that I've run into, I think, that are really important. Always encryption, right? Last line of defense, just encrypt that data. Today, to get this get ourselves started on this, we're not going to worry about creating a customer managed key. We're going to use the built-in key information. So we're just going to use an Amazon managed key for this. But ideally, if I'm deploying this for a customer, we're going to use those customer managed keys because it provides us with more insight and more control over the keys. The other thing to keep in mind here is by default, when we deploy our OpenSearch Serverless, our vector store, it's not deployed in a VPC by default. There are a bunch of security policies wrapped around it. For today, we're going to use just the sort of non-VPC deployment of this to start building everything out. And maybe we can, in a future session, build out something within a VPC. But we're going to go with the non-VPC deployment. So you'd want to make sure that you understand all of your security requirements before obviously doing this, but we're going to jump in. Now, the first thing I want to do is actually create this service role here. And if you're not familiar, a service role at AWS is really, the way I think about it, is it's allowing one service to communicate with one or more other services. In this case, we're going to need a service role for Bedrock because Bedrock is going to need to talk to other services on our behalf. So we'll open this up in a new tab. And, pretty good documentation. So we've built lots of roles before, and we're going to start building this first part of our application or our solution here by creating the role, which will be built or consist of a trust document, like who or what can assume this role. And you can see here in this example, we're going to allow Bedrock to assume this role. And then there are a number of permissions that we're going to set up. Okay. So let's jump over to PyCharm. And as I mentioned, I created sort of the foundation or the foundation, sort of how we build all of these projects that we set up on Twitch. So I'm going to create in here a YAML file for our IAM. And one thing I did, I created myself a little chunk of skeleton code because all of our YAML files start the same way. So we're going to give this a description. CloudFormation Workshop. I do have Q enabled here. So there's another great announcement for today. Q is now generally available, and I forget the names of them, but there's Q for developer or Q developer, which is what I'm using here. I've got that integrated into PyCharm. And then there's Q for business, which we actually did a series of Twitch sessions and wrote a blog post about very early on. So I'll make sure that in the show notes for this, I include that. So I'm going to say deploy IAM resources for, we'll say, let's build Twitch Bedrock sessions. Okay. And we'll leave the parameters as is for now. These are the default parameters we use: environment, owner, and owner email. And let's actually change this one to Twitch. And I'll change that in my schedule, my skeleton, so I don't have to worry about it. So that's it. And we need our resources section. So I'm going to call this Bedrock IAM and there we go. Okay. I'm going to just use this for now, and we'll name the role. Okay. So environment, Bedrock role, pretty good. I might get a little fancier if I needed to in the future, but that'll do the trick. And obviously, again, if you listen to the podcast, you know what I'm going to say here: trust but verify. So we can see right away, we're going to have to make some changes. So we want this actually to be assumable by Bedrock, not EC2. I'm not going to worry about path. And we'll come back to this piece later on. I also don't like to put policies right in our role like this. So instead, what we'll do is we'll create a customer managed policy and associate it to the role. So that's really all we need. Now, the one thing is, let me just pull this up. I can never remember where we can use tags. Let me just see here. This does support tags. Okay, so let's, best practice, let's add our tags here. So we'll say environment. I don't know what I was doing there. Can't spell. Perfect. Clean that up. And I am going to add something else here. And this is more for us, the back end. And actually, we're going to do this ref project. So one of the things, everything we do gets stored in GitLab, and often, you come back to look at this later on and you can't remember maybe where this project was. So what I did, I'll show you, is we now include just this project, and this is just the path in our GitLab implementation. Okay, so I'm going to add that everywhere as well, which means I should go up here and do this, right? Not going to worry about it. Default value, we'll pass that in, and I'm going to add that to my skeleton, so we don't have to worry about it later on. Okay, so that's that. That's our first bit. And then what we'll need is managed policy, Bedrock. I'm going to call this I'm a huge fan of, there we go. I'm a huge fan of Q. I use it every single day. I use it in the console sometimes. I use it all the time in my IDE, but I find it's funny sometimes, like you're expecting it to help autofill some stuff for you and it just doesn't. I don't know how it works like that, but sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to do this. Manage policy name, that's great. We have a description. The policy doc here, I'm going to get rid of all of the statements because we're going to have to add those. We're going to associate it to our role. I'm going to add a depends on statement. I like that. For me, it just sort of helps me keep everything straight. So our manage policy here, do I want to do it this way? No, we're going to do it the other way around. We're going to go like this. I'll fill that out later on. And then I'm not sure if manage policy actually supports tags. Give me a second. I'm just looking in the documentation. See, I do not see, at least from a CloudFormation perspective, that this is supported. It's not in the documentation. So I'm going to do this. Now I'm looking at, I'll just show you what I'm referring to here. Where's my box? So if we go back over here, I'm going to work through, we've got our trust relationship. So this is our role that we have already. We set this up. Oh, I'm going to actually add some of these additional conditions. So let's do that. This is just a way that we can add some additional protection. So right now, this is essentially saying, allow the Bedrock service to assume this role. And in the example, they've added some additional pieces. So we're going to say string equals AWS source account. And then what we're using here is a pseudo parameter. So what we're saying is allow Bedrock to assume this role, but only if the source account is the AWS account where we're deploying this. So when CloudFormation stands this up for us, it will substitute in the AWS account ID, the 12-digit account ID. Now, in their example, they also have ARN like this, okay? So there's another pseudo parameter. So we'll pass in the region, pass in the account ID, and they actually have it written like this: knowledge base Slack. I can find my Slack. There we go. Okay. So now what we've got is basically two conditions, both of which have to be satisfied. Must originate from a particular AWS account. And then in this case, the source ARN, the ARN that is essentially asking us to assume this role is any knowledge base. So /* in a particular account in a particular region. And these will be all filled in for us when we run this script, or we'll run this stat. Okay, so that's that first part. Now let's see here. Now we need our actual statements. So I'm going to say here, allow model access. And I'm, again, just taking this right off of, from the documentation. List mission models. List custom models. Okay. These are here. It's just stop. Then we've got, what do I want to call this? Allow model invoke. Okay, it did auto-populate that for us, which looks good. Now it's showing us here what this is going to do is it's going to allow Bedrock to basically have permissions to specific models in our account. And this is used, I'm looking in the documentation again here, they say models to embed your source data. So this is that embedding model piece. So what I'm going to do is in the example, they are using all three of the supported embedding models. And I think what we'll do is we're going to do the same thing in this case, just so that if we ever wanted to kind of try different models and test some things out, we could do that. In the documentation, it does not show that we require an account ID, but it does then say, I'm just going to copy these directly from documentation. So I'm just going to go like this. We'll auto-populate those. And then I'm just going to actually paste in what I want. So it becomes, and then we'll grab the other one. And like I said, I used Cohere Embed, the English model, which is what we'll use for this as well. But that'll match up what's in the doc. Now, the other thing is we need to give the Bedrock service access to an S3 bucket, right? Because that's where our data is going to sit. So let's set that up as well. And what does it need? It needs get object and list object. Now, I know we don't have this resource created yet. So what I'm going to do, it says here, now, how do I want to do this? What we basically need, I'll put some pseudocode in here for now. We need bucket name with a path. I guess we could really, in our case, the only thing that's going to exist in this bucket are the documents we want to use in our knowledge base. So I'm going to leave it as bucket name, whatever we end up calling the bucket name, /star. So that's a little bit of a placeholder for that. Now, we also need access to our OpenSearch service. This is where our vector database is. I'm actually going to do something here. No, I think that's fine. I'm trying to think of a way that'll catch our eye later. So now we're going to say OpenSearch access. All right, so we'll double check these. So this is actually significantly different than what Q is finishing for us here. So this is AOSS API access all. And then the resource in this case is AOSS, the region, the account ID, and this is going to be collection. And we're going to just give it access to all of the collections. In the documentation, they're showing you a specific collection ID, but to get this running, we're going to do it like this, and we can maybe tighten this up a little later. Maybe the better way to do this would be to create the S3 bucket first, and then the OpenSearch, what's it called? Well, let's just call it OpenSearch. Create the S3 bucket first, the OpenSearch service first, because then we can pull this information in. Okay, I'm going to finish this, but we won't deploy it right away. Looking at what else is in Firefox, we're not going to use an Amazon database, Aurora database cluster for this, so we don't need that. Database configured with Secrets Manager, we're not going to use Secrets Manager, so we don't need that. This is what I mentioned before, so using a KMS key for transient data storage. We're just going to use the built-in server-side encryption key for now to allow the creation of a key for transient data storage in the process of ingesting your data. Attach the following policy to your knowledge database. Might be something I'll come back later on to, maybe in the next session, but we definitely should be thinking about protection of data while it's at rest and in transit. So this is important. And then finally here, we need to provide permissions to chat with our documents. So this is required. Let's go and say, so we'll just call this Bedrock access does allow, and this is retrieve and generate is all. And we're going to allow that access to anything. This is interesting. Look at this. If you only want to grant a user access to chat with your documents and not retrieve and generate on all knowledge bases, you've got a different policy here. So we've got retrieve and grant is allow, retrieve and generate is allow. And then we've got an explicit deny here, which is retrieve. And remember, in IAM, an explicit deny will always win. Okay? So no matter what we do later on, this deny will win. And then they're showing you examples here of inserting the ARN for your knowledge base. That's fine. What do we have here? Permissions for AWS to manage a data source from another AWS account. We're going to put all of our data sources in a single AWS account, so we don't have to worry about that. Cross-account access, all that great stuff. I don't think we need any of this. Okay, so that's perfect. Okay, so we've got the the basics of this. But to my point that I mentioned earlier on, maybe what we'll do is we'll create our S3 bucket, and then we can use an import value here to pull in the ARN of our bucket right into this. So we don't have to sort of make something up. So let's go here. We're going to create S3 YAML, and then I'll use my little chunk of skeleton code again. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. We're going to grab this, and we'll dump that here. So now, go like this. Okay. Perfect. All right, so resources. So we'll call this S3 data source. So yeah, you know what? That's probably fine for now for a bucket name. Now, one of the things, actually, I'm going to do this. I like the idea of bucket names being generated by CloudFormation. So this will give us some randomness. We don't have to worry about overlapping bucket names or anything like that. So we'll leave that. I'm going to take version control out, and let me pull up the rest of this documentation in a second. Okay. There's probably, there's really not a whole lot we're going to need to do here, but we want to do a few things. Where is it? I'm looking for making sure this bucket is not public. Oh, looking right at it. So public access block configuration. Let's see if it populates that for us. Perfect. So what we're doing here is I have this set at the account level, but we're just ensuring here that we're not going to be flagged in Security Hub, and we're blocking public ACLs, public policies. Any public ACLs that are applied will be ignored, and we're restricting public access. So that's pretty easy. Do I want to do anything else to this? I think for now we're going to try to do this as simple as possible. Now, the thing that we need to do here, we do need to set some outputs, because I want to use an output value from our bucket creation to use as an import value on the other side. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, I need the ARN. So let's do a couple things. We're going to do name, and then we'll just say value is ref, and then we'll say export. And all I'm going to do here is just say name, and then let's copy this little chunk of code, and we're just going to change this and say ARN. And now we've got to change that to get attribute dot ARN and ARN. Okay. Perfect. I think that's probably enough to get us going on this. Now, if we go to our CI script, I know I have validate here. We're going to change this, and we're just going to say S3. I'm going to, this is going to fail. I can never remember the keyboard shortcut for this. So we're just going to comment all of this out. Okay. So super simple. This will be a way that we can just very quickly test the syntax of this and see if we can get it deployed. So let's just make this. If you've watched before, this is usually where things start falling apart on us, usually for spelling mistakes or something like that. Bear with me a second. Yeah, we have failed. I think I have a spacing issue here. Bear with me. Validate, validate. That sure looks good to me. It says, use CloudFormation. Here I was thinking I was being tricky and getting this up and running before I needed it. And I still have a typo in my little skeleton code. So just bear with me a second here. I'm going to find an example of this and just see what I've done wrong. Oh, it's funny. I use this every day and still don't remember the structure of these commands, which is always surprises. Okay, so there's our stage, right? We have actually got a stage name and then our script. So let's do this. Let's try it again. All right, so I'll show you what we have. It's nothing fancy at this point, but all I did was we at least tested our pipeline. Our little simple S3 template passes the built-in CloudFormation validation. So now let's flick back to PyCharm here and let's do, sorry, again, there's probably a better way to do this. Edit, place, let's do it like this. If the beginning of the line with this, just replace it. There we go. That's a little better, right? So I'm going to say here, we're going to say S3 deploy, and we'll give this a stack name, and we'll just hard code it for now. So we'll say Bedrock. That's good. We'll use that structure for everything. So let's do it like this: application Bedrock knowledge. Right. This way, not Twitter. Sorry, Twitch. Okay? This way, I can find these quicker later on. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up, say, application dash. I'm going to put environment in here dash S3. Okay, so this is our S3 bucket. It requires the validate job first. And then here you can see I just used this as a placeholder. We'll do that. Tags, project is here. We actually don't have to override any of the parameters, I don't think. I might leave the parameter overrides in here anyways, and we'll just in case we ever want to do it later, that's fine. Do not need that. Okay, so let's do this. Go back to blank here. Failed immediately? It's probably, oh, yeah. We need now a new stage definition, right? Because there's our stage. Okay, at least it didn't fail immediately. That's always a plus. Okay, so there's our S3 deploy going. Let's go over to CloudFormation. And there's our S3 bucket. Okay, so we'll just have a quick look at the change set. Looks good. And we'll say execute. Tag policy does not allow the specified value. Oh, we've got a tagging policy in here on these accounts, and I forget what it is. If you're not familiar, a tag policy is something that you can enable at the AWS organization level, and you can either report on tags in your environment or enforce the use of tags within your environment. And I've got one on here, and I think don't allow, if I go back over here, I want to say this is supposed to be like, we'll try this, and if this doesn't work, I'll put this in here. I'm feeling pretty confident that that's what we use as our tagging strategy. Updated tags. I just want to make sure our S3 bucket goes first. At least the pipeline isn't complicated, so it should run pretty quickly. Okay, hold on a second. I got to jump into another account. Bear with me. I'm going to have to look this up. Policies, tag policies, environment tag can be environment can be production or development. Who knew we'd be thwarted by a tagging policy? What's the actual error? Tag policy does not allow the specified value for the following tag environment. Oh, you know what I did? I know what I did. I think I know what I did. I changed it in here, but up here, see what I did? I'm overriding that. So what is our default? Our default is development. So let's just do this and get rid of that. And then that means here, I'm going to leave. No, we won't need it there. We won't need it there. Let me deploy or delete this stack. Try this again. Okay, that's good. Third time's a charm, maybe. A little better. Didn't fit. Oh, man. It does not like my tags. What have I done wrong? Oh, well, I see one problem, but that's not this. The tag policy does not allow the specified value for environment tag. Develop. Oh, look at what I did. I changed it in the wrong place. I changed it in the stack we're not actually deploying. So let me also, okay, I changed it there. I changed it in the IAM stack, but not the S3 stack, which is the stack we're actually trying to run. Let's try this one more time. Go. there. Yay. While I'm waiting for that, there is another function that I want to use that I always forget how it's actually structured. It's the import value. Okay, so that's good. So now if we go resources, here is our S3 bucket, properties, no bucket versioning. There's all our tags. We've got default encryption using server-side keys managed by S3. Really nothing too fancy here, right? So that's our bucket. And what I really want to do is see the outputs. Now I want to take this ARN and I want to inject it into our IAM template. And that's what I need to remember. So I think I can cheat here off of one of our earlier projects. So just bear with me a second. There's an intrinsic function called import value. And when you look at the structure of it, it's a relatively easy thing to do, but I can never remember the actual structure of it. So let me see if I can just find one quickly here. We use it all the time, so I'm hoping I can quickly find something will give us what I need. Here we go. So if we go now to our IAM template, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add what we call these a stack parameter. So this is where I want to refer to another stack. I want to take an output value from that stack and use it as the input into this stack. So I'm just going to call this S3 stack, and we'll just define it as a string. And then what we want to do is right here, I'm going to do this, S3 stack, and we just called it ARN. So that'll pull in the ARN for this. Now, the one thing we have to do here is we need the slash star. So I'm going to, I think we can do it like this. I think we can do a join, which then is the delimiter, which is I want a slash. Let me just look the join function up here. Again, can never remember the actual format of this. It's Q isn't helping me fill this in. Oh yeah, okay. So structures like this, so comma, there we go. And then we want to take this guy, put it there, comma, star. So what should happen is we'll pull the ARN in, right? Separate these two fields, the ARN and the star, with a slash. Join those fields together, concatenate them. And then we're going to leave this the same. So what we need to do now is we need to go here, and we're going to do this. We're going to say IAM deploy. It also needs now, in this case, the S3 deploy job to be finished. And we're going to put in here variables. So we're going to say S3 stack is, see, I'm going to just pull these in. And what we can do down here is I can say S3 stack. So that should be good. Famous last words, right? Now, I need a capabilities statement in here. So we're going to say capabilities. And the question is did we name our resources in IAM, or did we let CloudFormation do it? We named them. See how we've got a name defined here and a name defined there? So that means in here, we need to say capability named IAM. So let's do this. Good that. Let's deploy. Oh, I'm in the wrong. I cheated and grabbed it out of an older demo we did, so it's Bedrock. So it didn't fail in the validation phase, at least. That's good. Here are IAM resources, but see what I've got here? Because I took the environment name out, so it's not populating that now. I won't worry about it today. Change sets, all this should be is our manage policy and our role. And you'll notice here, inputs, there's our S3 stack name. Bad stack names now, but we can fix those at a later date. So there's our policy. Actually, while we're waiting for that, let's go back here and go like this. Fix stack names. Just so I remember. This will be our to-do list. Okay, so there we go. Right? We've now got our IAM resources up and running. And if we go resources, we go to our manage policy document that we created. What we should see in here, if we go to JSON, there is the ARN that represents that S3 bucket that we created. And see, because we, Alexa, stop. Because we didn't hard code a name in there, what CloudFormation does for us is basically builds the name out on a combination of, that's our stack name. Okay. This is the logical resource name that we created in the stack definition or in the template. And then there's just a random string. Okay, so that's good. Progress there. All right, so if you think about this, we've got our role created now. We've got an S3 bucket. Now what we need is our vector store, because I want to do the same thing. I want to deploy that vector store and then the collection information so that we can include that in our IAM role, so we can tie that role down to a specific collection. Because right now, if you remember, I didn't do what was in the documentation. I simply said all collections rather than a specific ARN that highlighted the collection that we're going to create. So this is really a database resource. So we're going to say database, and we'll go in here and we'll create a new file called OpenSearch. And now I think our skeleton has been updated. We go here and we'll say OpenSearch. All right, so let's flip back over to, let me find this first. Now remember also, there are two different types of OpenSearch. There's what I'll call the server-based version, and then there's a serverless implementation. We actually want to use the serverless implementation for this. And when I did my search, you can see here, it pulled up the server-based one. So we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to use this, okay? And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at a collection. This is really what we're after. So what do we need? A description, a name. Do we want standby replicas, tags, and types? And we want, if I recall, we want a vector search type here. So let's build this out. So we'll call this Bedrock vector database, I guess. OpenSearch Serverless collection. So let's do, let's put name first. And we're going to use the same naming structure that we used. Do we need a name? Yeah, it is required. Okay. So what I'm going to do then is we're going to say sub project Bedrock. So we don't want to use project because that's that long slash name. I'm just thinking about what we have. Let's get rid of the README for now. What we have here. So these are kind of the standard guys. So why don't we do application? That's going to cause a problem. See this? We don't actually have the application parameter in our tags. And then we'll just do OpenSearch. Now we have to fix this. So we need here, we're going to say application type string, that, and I'm going to add this for our existing templates. We're not using them here, but this way everything's in sync. And we'll also just add it empty to there. Okay, so that'll create our name for us. Description, I'll just say vector DB for Bedrock Twitch sessions. Okay, that's good. Standby replicas indicates whether to use standby replicas for your collection. This isn't going to be big enough, so we won't worry about that. We do need to define a type. Now I'm going to use this. I'll just call it DB type, and we're going to put that up here and we'll say DB type. It's a string. Okay. The default is going to be vector cert, and then our allowed values will be, I don't know where it's pulling all this stuff in, but we'll say vector search, or time series. Those are the three options, but we'll set the default. So that's fine. That'll pull in there. And then tags, which I will borrow from here. As I was going through the list of all these things, I'll flip back over to the documentation. And I noticed one thing. You must create a matching encryption policy in order for a collection to be created successfully. You can specify the policy resource within the same CloudFormation as the collection resource if used depends on. Okay. So what's our encryption policy? I don't see an encryption policy over here. I want the documentation. How do I? Could it be a security config? Isn't that weird that specifies a security configuration for serverless? Ah, there we go. Creates an encryption or a network policy be used by your serverless collections. So we're not going to worry about a network policy today. Although, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, normally we would want to put this inside of VPC to have better control over who or what can access it, right? But today, to get this working, we're just going to leave it a little less. We're not going to put it in the network. So we need to define our security policy. So if we go back to PyCharm, and let's do this. We'll just call this security policy. Now it did say we can do this. Depends on security policy like that. Okay. Now what do we need here? It's type AWS. Oh, look at that. It pulled that in. Description. We're just going to say security policy for OpenSearch vector DB. And we'll change the name here. Description isn't required, but a name is. So we'll just call this OpenSearch security policy. And this is a little weird. I like to do it like that. Okay, so that's fine. And then we need actual policy document, and then we need to have a type definition for this. So it did not fill in the type definition. So let's do this. Type is, we're going to say, can have two values. So we're going to do this. Ref, I'm going to call it policy type. And then we'll go up here. We'll do the same thing. We're going to say policy type. It's a string. The default is, for us, we're going to say encryption, and then the allowed values are encryption. Okay, so that'll fill in our policy type. Now the question is, what do we put in here? They give us an example So here's a encryption policy in YAML. So this is a JSON document. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this for now and go back over to PyCharm. All of this can go away because it's definitely not. Okay. So what this is saying, resource types collection, resource is log connection or collection logs. AWS own key is true. I didn't look at this before, so I'm not quite sure. I think what we'll do is we'll see if we can get this deployed today. Because then what we could do is we could have the S3 bucket, the vector database, our IAM access, or our IAM role complete. And then what I'll do is before the next session, I'll figure this out a little more so I can come back with some more information on that one. And then the last thing I want to do here is we need an output section because I need an ARN again, right? And let's see, in this case, we have a collection. It won't reload my page here. I'm not sure what's happening all of a sudden. Let's back up instead. Security config. I'm just looking for collection. Okay, return values. Okay, that's easy enough. So we're going to do this. So if we use a ref, it gives us the logical ID. So instead, we're going to say value get attribute dot ARN, export, and then again, we're just going to call this ARN. All right. I'm not completely convinced that this is exactly the format that we should use, but it's worth a shot. So I'm going to go here. We're going to go here and say database. What did we call it? OpenSearch. And you know what? We should add the other one too. Security IAM. Now I'm not going to put it in the deploy phase quite yet. I'm just going to make sure that it at least passes a CloudFormation validation check. So added search collection. So let's deploy that. We go back to our pipeline. Let's see what we get. Okay, so validation phase is running. And we got an error. Template error, unrecognized resource type, AWS policy. Doesn't like either of those. What have I done wrong there? Okay. Looks okay to me. Let me just do this. Oh boy. Okay. Really, all I want to do here is paste. Sure looks good, doesn't it? What have I done wrong? Type? Is it just a no? I don't know what's wrong there. What did the error message say? OpenSearch YAML, when calling the validate template format error, unrecognized resource types. AWS. Oh. No. Resources. It's not a spacing issue. I've got a tab and then a tab, right? Tab. So there's my logical name. And then I've got a tab. My type and properties is the same. Type and properties. That looks good. Type properties. I'm calling the validate template operation. Template format error, unrecognized resource types. AWS, OpenSearch, security calls. AWS, OpenSearch Serverless collection. I don't know. I'm going to do something really silly. We're just going to grab, actually the S3 definition's a little smaller. I'm just going to grab this. We're going to dump that at the top here just to check how I've got this laid out. And it all lines up. Type properties. That's very strange. Well, I'm out of time anyways for today, folks. So I will figure this part out for next time. But I got to jump on to something else. We'll pick this up later in the week and see if we can build it out. So bye for now, and thanks for joining me.